Welcome back, listeners, to Sandman Stories Presents, a folklore podcast where I read you to sleep or until the next story. I'm your host, Dustin. Today we are back in the book of Armenian folklore written down by A.G. Seklemian. In this story, a prince had to show his bravery, and that involves a giant that is invincible, until he isn't. Okay, let's begin. Bedik and the Invulnerable Giant. Many years ago, there was a king who had 7 sons. As soon as each one of his princes was old enough, his father sent him on an expedition so that he might display his bravery and marry the maiden that he preferred. Thus 6 of the princes were wed, but heaven only knows whether they showed real bravery or not. It was now the turn of the 7th son, whose name was Bedik. His father gave him a horse of lightning, a magic sword, and a bow and arrow, saying, "Go, my son, and may heaven grant you good luck." Bedik started and traveled the length and breadth of the world, visiting the land of darkness, the land of light, the land of fairies, and the land of giants. He did battle with men, beasts, genii, and all kinds of creatures which they encountered on the way, and bested them all. But in his fighting, he lost all his servants and wealth. He was alone one day when he came to a magnificent castle built of marble, and decorated with gold and jewels, and surrounded with orchards and gardens. He walked about everywhere and looked everywhere, but could see no human being, man nor woman. He waited all day, hiding behind some bushes. Toward evening, there came a giant, covered all over with armor, brandishing his bow and arrows, which were made of heavy steel. When he walked, the earth trembled. When he came near the castle, he became aware of the presence of a human being, and he exclaimed, "Aha! I smell a human being. I go a-hunting to the mountains, and lo, the prey has come to my home. Ho! Human being, disclose yourself, or else I will make a morsel out of you." The lad was looking at the giant from his hiding place. He was the strongest creature that he had ever seen. Neither a sword nor an arrow could pierce him. Nevertheless, he decided to face him, and coming out from behind the bushes, he stood before him. "Who are you?" asked the giant. "The bird with its wing and the snake on its belly could not approach this castle of mine, and how could you arrive here? Have you not heard of the fame of the Invulnerable Giant?" "I have," said the lad bravely, "and my name is no less famous than yours. I am Bedik. I have traveled all over the world, and having heard of you, I came to measure swords with you." The giant gazed at the lad for a moment and suddenly sneezed. The burst of air through his nostrils caused the lad to leap 10 rods away. "Halloo!" exclaimed the giant, laughing. "You do not seem to be able to fight me very well, do you? Nay, come here again. Do not be afraid. I will not hurt you. I have heard about you. You are a brave little fellow. But you see, you can do me no harm, because I am invulnerable. Come, be my servant, for I need a skillful human servant, and I do not think I can find a better one than you. Bring your sword and bow. You see they are not able to pierce me. We may need them for hunting or other purposes." The lad consented, and they lived together for a time. One day, the giant said to the youth, "You see, I am immortal, but I have an anxiety which gnaws at my heart every day and night. The king of the East has a daughter, and there is no beauty like hers under the sun. I have made 7 trips to carry her away, but so far have not succeeded. If you can bring her here, I will bestow upon you a kingly reward." "I will bring her for you," said the lad. "But do you promise it upon your soul?" said the giant. "I do," said the lad, and at once started on the expedition. After a long journey, he came to the city of the king of the East, changed his clothes, and took the shape of a farmer boy, and then became the apprentice of the king's gardener. He saw the princess sitting in her window and working her needle. She was so beautiful that she seemed to say, "Son, you need not shine, since I am shining." The lad fell in love with her and began to curse the hour when he made the solemn promise to bring her to the giant. One day, Taking advantage of the absence of his master, the lad stripped off his humble clothes, and putting on his princely garments, he mounted his horse of lightning and rode around in the king's garden. The maiden was looking from her window and saw him. She had never seen a young man so perfect, and she fell in love with him. On the following day, she sent 2 of her maids to the youth, informing him of her love. The lad sent her word who he was, and how he had heard of her wondrous beauty, and now he was waiting to do anything that she ordered. The city was surrounded by high walls because of the fear of the invulnerable giant, who assaulted it every year with the intention of carrying off the maiden. But the people of the city, being brave fighters, would not let the maiden be borne away, so the lad had a hard task to perform. One day, the girl sent the following message to him. "Tomorrow is the feast of Navasard, when all the maidens of the city go out for recreation and merriment. But I am not allowed to go forth, because it is the day when the invulnerable giant makes his annual assault to seize me. I will, however, go to the garden by the riverside, which is surrounded by high walls. There I will wait for you to see your display of bravery." Having received this message, on the next day, the youth put on his princely garments, equipped his magic sword, and taking his bow and arrows, he mounted his horse of lightning. Once or twice he steered the horse near the garden wall, until it began to gallop as fast as if it had wings. With one stroke of the whip, lo! It jumped over the wall like an eagle, and instantly the horse and its rider alighted in the middle of the garden. In the twinkling of an eye, the lad had put his arm around the maiden's waist, and placing her behind him on the saddle, gave another stroke of the whip, which made the horse leap over the garden wall, and in a second they were on safe ground outside the city, galloping like a flash of lightning. The maids in attendance were horror-stricken, thinking that it was a hurricane which had taken their lady from them. It was a long time before they understood what had taken place. Then they informed the king, who had sent out his bravest horsemen in pursuit of the fugitives, but it was too late. The couple on the back of the horse of lightning passed over the mountains and valleys until they came to the bank of a deep river. A stroke of the whip, and the steeds swam the deep waters and emerged on the other side. The king's horsemen came as far as the river, but seeing that the couple had crossed the frontier, they returned. As soon as the maiden and the youth had crossed the water, and the invulnerable giant's castle appeared in the distance, the maiden said to the lad, "Bedik, dearest, we have come so far, and yet you have not spoken a single word to me. You have shown no sign of love. For heaven's sake, tell me, did you kidnap me for yourself, or for another?" "You said for heaven's sake," replied the lad. "I will therefore tell you the truth. I have kidnapped you for the invulnerable giant. I have promised to deliver you to him." "Alas!" exclaimed the maiden. "May heaven's curse rest upon the invulnerable. He could not get me for all the world. You do not reflect that it was by your skill and valor that you secured me. Woe be to frail womanhood. Maidens are the slaves of their hearts. For you, only you, I eloped. If you reject me, here is the deep water, and here the high precipice. I would be better food for fishes and birds. May heaven's fire burn and consume the hard hearts of men." So saying, she prepared to throw herself down into the abyss, into the deep water. The lad's heart began to burn like a furnace, and he took hold of her, saying, "Nay, dearest, do not harm yourself. It was because of the vow I made upon my soul that I am taking you to the giant, and the day you become his wife, I will put an end to my life with this sword, for without you, life for me would be a curse." Then they exchanged vows that they would use every means to put a speedy end to the invulnerable giant, and then be married, because they could not marry without destroying the giant. Thereupon they mounted the horse and began to proceed towards the castle. The giant, who from the tower of the castle was looking their way, seeing them at a distance, immediately came down and ran to meet them. He expressed his gratitude to the lad, and his excess of love to the maiden. He treated her with extreme kindness, fearing that he might hurt her tender feelings with his unpolished manners. "Are you pleased with this?" he asked her. "What do you want me to do in order to make you as happy as possible?" "I am very well, thank you. You are everything for me," said the maiden, suppressing her bitter hatred towards him. "But my parents consented to send me to you only under the condition that I should keep myself a virgin 7 years longer. I have given an oath that I will do so. Otherwise, the love with which they have cherished me would turn into poison and defile my whole life. Do you accept this condition?" "I do," said the giant. "As you are now in my hand, I am willing to wait not only 7 years, but if necessary, 7 times 7 years." They exchanged solemn vows and decided that Bedik should live with them and be the best man at their wedding. The maiden occupied one apartment of the castle, the youth and the giant the other apartments. And so they lived for a time. But the lad and the maiden were very uneasy. It was in vain to think of killing the giant. He was invulnerable. If they eloped, he would certainly overtake them, and there was no escaping from his wrath. One day as the giant was lying on the couch with his head on the maiden's lap, she said to him, "In former times, how did you live alone, without any companions? And how is it that you are invulnerable, when so many arrows and swords are thrown at you? What is the secret of your immortality?" At first the giant refused to tell, but the maiden pestered him, saying, "If you do not inform me, then you do not love me. Tell me in plain words that you love me not, and I will cease to live." The giant was at last persuaded to give up his secret, and said, 7 days' journey from this castle there is a white mountain, where lives an untamable white bull, which neither man nor beast dares to approach. Once every 7 days he becomes thirsty, and goes to the top of the white mountain, where there is a white fountain with 7 white marble reservoirs full of water, which he drains in a single gulp. The bull has in his belly a white fox, which in its turn, in its belly, has a white box made of mother of pearl. In that box are 7 white sparrows. These are my spirits, and those are my 7 secrets. The bull cannot be subdued, the fox cannot be caught, the box cannot be opened, the sparrows cannot be seized. If either of them is taken, the others will escape, so I remain unconquerable and invulnerable and immortal." The maiden told the secret to Bedik, adding, "I have done what I could do. Now it remains for you to do the rest." After a few days the lad equipped his sword, and, bearing his bow and arrow, took leave of the giant, saying that he would go on a month's journey. He went directly to the convent of the 7 wise monks, who were renowned all over the world for their great erudition and learning. After performing his religious duties before the holy altar, he asked the monks, "How is the unconquerable man conquered, and the unsubduable beast subdued?" And he received the following answer: "Man by woman, beast by wine." On the following day he loaded 7 horses with 7 skinfuls of 7-year-old wine, and took them to the White Mountain. He emptied the water out of the 7 marble reservoirs, and filled them with wine, turning the water of the fountain elsewhere. Nearby he dug a trench, and hiding himself, waited for the result. At the end of 7 days the white bull came to drink, and smelling the wine he was so much terrified that he leaped as high as the height of 7 poplar trees, and ran back roaring and bellowing. On the following day he returned, and being thirsty, drank the wine and was overcome. He leaped once or twice and fell down senseless. The lad drew his sword and approached and cut off the bull's head. Let us return for a moment to the palace of the giant. It was the last day of the 7 years during which he had waited for the maiden. He had gone to hunt, so that they might have noble game for their wedding dinner. When the bull was overcome and fell, the giant began to grow drowsy. As soon as the youth cut off the bull's head, the giant turned dizzy, and a tremor ran through his frame. "Alas!" cried the giant, "someone has killed the white bull. I know it is my fault. I gave my secret to the maiden, and she has told it to Bedik or some other lover. The bull is killed, and I must die. I will go and kill the maiden. She is not to be mine. Why shall she be for another?" So saying, he began to run towards the castle. Bedik cut the bull's belly open. The fox was also drunk and stupid, and he cut off its head. The giant lost his senses, and the blood began to gush out of his nostrils. The youth, opening the stomach of the fox, obtained the pearl box and put it down in warm blood. The The lid was opened, and the lad seized the 7 sparrows. Thereupon streams of blood began to run from the giant's mouth and ears, and his 2 eyeballs started from their sockets like 2 great pomegranates. But still he was running towards the castle, sword in hand, and roaring like a mad beast. The maiden was horror-stricken, and quickly ran up to the top of the tower, determined to throw herself off then and kill herself, rather than fall into the hands of the giant. The giant had barely reached the castle door when Bedik killed 2 of the sparrows. With that, the 2 knees of the giant were broken. He killed 2 more sparrows, and the giant's 2 arms withered. He killed 2 more, and the lungs and the heart of the giant ceased to breathe and beat. He killed the last sparrow, and the giant knocked his head against the threshold of the castle. His skull was broken, with his brains oozing out. A black smoke rose from his mouth and nostrils, and he lay as dead as a stone. Thereupon Bedik came on like a flash of lightning. The maiden descended from the tower, and they embraced one another. At once, they decided to go to the maiden's parents and celebrate their wedding. They collected all the wealth from the invulnerable giant, and mounting the horse of lightning, began to proceed towards the east. The maiden being the only child of the king of the east, he was greatly grieved at her loss, seeing that he was getting old and there was no successor to his throne. On the day following the maiden's disappearance, the king had sent his servants to the 7 wise monks asking their advice, and he had received the following message. The hero who carried off your daughter is a prince. At the end of 7 years your daughter will be restored to you by the same hero, as lovely as before. The anxious father waited for 7 long years. It was the last day of the 7th year. The king and his subjects had made great preparations for the reception of the returning princess and her hero. Towards evening, the king and his peers were looking anxiously from the 7 towers of the city wall. The sun was just going down, when a flash of lightning was seen on the western horizon, and in the twinkling of an eye, Bedik and the maiden reached the city gate on the back of their fiery steed. They were received amid the wild acclamations of the crowd, and were led to the king's palace. There they knelt before the king and told their story. The king blessed them, and for 40 days and 40 nights, the wedding feast was celebrated. They attained their wish. May heaven grant that you may attain your wishes. 3 apples fell from heaven, 1 for me, 1 for the storyteller, and 1 for him who entertained the company. The end. Ooh, I really liked that story. I felt a little bit bad for the giant because, yeah, he does try and kidnap the princess, but he's making an effort for the princess, whereas the other guy just kind of snuck in and stole her. But, love wins in the end. There was a lot of blood and gore at the end when the giant was dying. That was pretty wild. But we'll keep going through these stories, and there's plenty more from Armenia. And the podcast Shoutout is to the Nuzzle House podcast. If you like grumpy men reading public domain books, there might be a podcast for you. I actually had a great time listening to his podcast and walking around Chiang Mai listening to a sci-fi book with ridiculous plot lines and strange dialogue. Glenn Nuzzle had me cracking up the whole time I was listening. And so if you like his show as much as I do, go and give him a like, a listen, and a review, especially on Good Pods. It's a good place to find it, or Podchaser. And the listener shout-out is to Sneads Ferry, North Carolina. Located on the coast in traditional Lumbee territory, Sneads Ferry was named for the guy who operated a ferry from the north side of the inlet. A bridge built in 1939 ended this service. There's a man named Ennet that was named for the other side, Ennet's Ferry, but Sneed won out in the end. And it looks like a wonderful place to visit and collect some rural sounds. And if I do go there, y'all will be the first to know. And so to the under 10,000 people population, I say thank you and good night.